Hello there, my name is Lord Xarxes, and welcome back to our journey through the world and lore of Bethesda's The Elder Scrolls. In this episode, we'll be looking at the Aedra, the original spirits of the Orbis, and the important role they play in the universe of The Elder Scrolls as we know it. So please, join me as we turn the pages of the Mysterium Xarxes, and dive once more into the Orbis. The phrase original spirits that I use to describe the Aedra isn't just a descriptor, it's a translation. As far as has been made clear in the admittedly long and convoluted lore of the Elder Scrolls series, the Aedra are possibly the first, and likely the most powerful, non-primordial beings to exist in the Orbis. Born from the blood spilled between Anu and Padomay, the Aedra are the architects and builders for Nirn and Tamriel as we experience them. However, possibly is the key word in those last few sentences, since when it comes to the origins of the Aedra, there's a key issue that we need to address. We know what event resulted in the birth of the Aedra, but we don't know for sure which of them it was. As we looked at in the previous episode, Anu and Padomay had two conflicts before Anu took measures to move their battle away from the Orbis, and there's no solid answer as to which one of those resulted in the birth of the Aedra. Were they born from the first set of blood spilled, and were the life over which Anu watched on Nir's 12 worlds? Did they come into being after the second conflict, alone in a universe whose creators had been forced to abandon it? Are they a combination of the two, with the surviving residents of the Shattered Worlds finding newborn brethren in the remnants of their home? Just like in real history, there are multiple different accounts presented both in-game and in wider materials, of which few agree, and others straight up contradict each other. But, in a way, the exact origin of the Aedra doesn't really matter, because what makes them important to the world only comes after Anu and Padomay have exited the Orbis. Let's move on to the Aedra themselves. Going into proper detail about the Aedra is an impossible task for a single video. Just the primary story that the Aedra are associated with in the lore will be a video all of its own separate from this, and that's before we even touch on the numerous characters and tales of the prominent Aedra associated with Nirn and its inhabitants. You'll certainly be seeing those videos in the future, but for the moment we're just going to be looking at the Aedra as a whole, or more accurately, how the Aedra divided that whole into their own distinct groups based on the method of their creation. When you have two entities fighting, it's only natural that blood will be spilled by both parties. In Anu and Padomay's conflict, the differing bloods from each primordial force resulted in differing types of Aedra coming into being. From Anu's blood came the Aedra that would come to be known as the Magna-Ge, orderly beings in the mould of their father. From Padomay came the Daedric, inheriting their progenitor's essence of freedom and change. But from those places where the blood of the brothers mixed, an entirely different type of spirit was born, the Aedra. Mixing the core concepts of both primordial forces, the Aedra are depicted as the most human of the Aedra. Now, before we go any further, it's important to note that for once it is made clear in the lore that the differences between these three groups aren't physical. At their cores, Aedra, Daedra and Magna-Ge are the same sorts of being. The lines are drawn between them based upon their mindsets and attitudes to existence. It's entirely possible for, say, a Magna-Ge to become a Daedra. With that said then, let's look at what those differences actually mean for each of the Aedra. The Magna-Ge are the Aedra for which we have the least official lore and sources of information. There's a very good reason for that. The Magna-Ge are defined by the fact that they have no presence on the plane of existence that encompasses Nirn and its occupants. Beyond the fact that they are Anuic and take after their father in various aspects, nothing is really stated about them. Perhaps that's the whole point. Lore loses much of its enjoyment if there's no mystery, nothing to speculate about. Whether they have a role to play in later games is yet to be decided, but for now, they continue to be mysterious, unearthly spirits. The Daedra, on the other hand, will be a much more familiar set of characters for Elder Scrolls fans. From lowly scamps to towering Zivali, Daedric enemies are a common sight across the Elder Scrolls series. However, not everything that's Daedric is an Etada. When we talk about Daedra in the sense of the Etada, we're talking about the entities that we know as the Daedric princes. Sheogorath, Molag Bal, Azura, Vermina. The Daedric pantheon is made up primarily of Etada born of Padomay, free-willed and living quite literally by their own rules. The lesser Daedra that we encounter as players are normally just their creations. They perhaps share a spark of their master's spirit, but they're certainly not Etada themselves. The Daedric princes are very much the most visible Etada. Whilst the Aedra do have a presence, it's the Daedra who our heroes encounter time and time again, foiling or aiding their plans and gaining their powerful artifacts in the process. As a result, it's from the Daedra that we have the best idea of just how powerful an Etada can be. Whilst they're not omnipotent by any means, it's made quite clear that comparing the average resident of Nirn to an ant in the face of an Etada might just be an insult to the ant. While the player characters of the games are very much mortals of a different sort, and they're exceedingly powerful forces on Tamriel, the Daedric princes are on a whole different level. The only times any mortal of Tamriel ever manages to match or even best a Daedric prince is when they're empowered by an Etadic force of their own. Make no mistake, the Etada are gods, even those who are not the gods. That brings us on to the Aedra. Whilst the Daedra are the most visible foreground Etada, the Aedric characters are in some cases quite literally the foundation of Nirn as we experience it. Whenever you hear someone in games discuss the Divine, they're talking about a group of predominantly Aedric beings that are in effect the gods of Nirn. The defining characteristic of what makes an Etada an Aedra is that they had involvement with the creation of Mundus, the mortal plane of the Orbis in which Nirn sits. Some are even merged with Nirn itself as the mythical El-Norfe. Now, even though they aren't as visibly active in the games as their Daedric counterparts, sitting more in the background lore sphere, the Aedra are very much involved with mortal life on Nirn still. They're worshipped in various different forms by its people as various different gods, and their existence and presence is part of daily life in Tamriel. But when the more powerful Aedra do act, those are some of the most impactful moments in Nirn's history. Martin Septin's transformation into an avatar of Akatosh is just one example of how the Aedra are no less impressive than their Daedric kin. But there is of course a question here. How did the Aedra get involved with Mundus? What led these spirits to put, or not put, their powers towards its creation? Why did the Aedra put themselves into it and the Daedra didn't? The answer lies with the story of Lorcan, and his ambitions to create life of his own. But that is another story for another time. I've always found the Etada one of the more unique elements of the Elder Scrolls mythology. It's not that the concept itself is new or particularly innovative. In fact, it's almost entirely the opposite. The idea of human-minded gods, with emotions and drives just like we do, is found in polytheistic pantheons across history. Ancient Egypt, Persia, Greece, Rome, Scandinavia. These are just a few overarching examples of cultures that had gods who were, in some ways, effectively human. What sets the mythology, and it is very much a mythology at this point, of the Elder Scrolls universe apart, for me, is the idea that not all godly beings are the gods of mortals. Naturally, we're only human. We define gods by their relation to the lives we live. But in the Elder Scrolls world, we see beings of godly power who couldn't have less of an interest in the mortal plane, to the point of even directly removing themselves from any point of interaction with it. It's an idea that I think has a lot of potential for development, and one I hope gets explored further as the series goes on. But that brings me to the end of this episode. As always, I hope you found this video enjoyable. If you have, It would be much appreciated on my end if you would like the video, subscribe to the channel, and so on. In the next episode, we'll continue our exploration of the Aedra by looking at the story of Lorcan and the creation of Mundus. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next time.